Here's the facade of Santa Maria Novella. And I don't know if you can see in the frieze over the door, there are these strange sort of things, and they're actually sails with ropes flying off them. And of course there's a clue that up in the top frieze, it says Johannes Rucellai. And so this is Giovanni di Paolo Rucellai. He paid for this facade by Alberti. And there are the sails. And so this was his emblem, just like the Medici had their bulls and their diamond rings. Rucellai had this wind-filled sail. I suppose probably alluding to the fruits of trade. But it's rather a wonderful sort of symbol, isn't it? Rather kind of poetic. And it's all over that building. And here's the man himself. But he looks rather sort of biblical, doesn't he, really, there? And in the background, obviously, is the church. And then on the right is his sort of tomb. And so that's what we're going to look at, which is really such a beautiful thing. And so he decided that he wanted to have a miniature version of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is this thing, in theory, the tomb of Jesus. Very, very, very holy thing. And there used to be terrific pilgrimages, and everyone would walk around it a bit like in Mecca, walking around the Kaaba. But anyway, Giovanni di Paolo decided that this was just the thing for him. And so he got Alberti to do a version of it in his local church. And it is just the most perfect, beautiful, extraordinary bit of Renaissance. And it used to be open into the church, and you see the two columns on the wall on the left. Those originally were freestanding columns, and that was open. And it was a side chapel in this church. It's San Pancrazio. And now the church is a museum of Marino Marini, an Italian sculptor from the 50s. The chapel has been reopened as part of that. But it is just unbelievably pure and beautiful. And it's got this fantastic lettering designed by Alberti. And this is sort of terribly important for typography and for, font design. But they are extremely beautiful letters. And I think they say something about, this is the tomb, but he's not really here, which of course is doubly true here, because obviously it's just a miniature copy of the tomb. But here's more of the lettering and these unbelievably beautifully carved capitals and the marble. It's just, the work is incredible. And then the outside is all covered in these emblems. I think partly they're emblems of the Rucellai, like the sail here, 3 diamond rings for the Medici, and then we've got 3 ostrich feathers, and then here we've got a diamond ring with 2 feathers. So it's a whole lot of stuff about the Medici, and then there are a lot of just abstract geometric designs. And here's a bit of porphyry inlaid along with the black and white marble. But there are, I can't remember how many, 36 or something, of these emblems all around it in these fantastically graphic sort of black framed squares of white marble. And it's such a beautiful, extraordinary little thing. There's a door, do you see, under the inscription there on the left. There's a sort of a doorway, but I think you'd have to, if you crouch, you can just about get your head in and have a look. You'd really have to crawl to get in. This is inside, and there's this little tiny altar and a little tiny altar piece above it. And whether a little tiny priest used to go in and do a little tiny mass, I don't know. But anyway, all designed by Alberti, which prompted me to think we should go and see his incredible, unfinished church/temple for this man called Sigismondo Malatesta, who was the Lord of Rimini and was another of these sort of condottieri, mercenary, warlord. This was the main church, I think, in Rimini. And so I think probably Malatesta's ancestors were already buried there, or he wanted to do it up to bury them and bury himself and bury his mistress, who then became his wife, Isotta Deliatti. And so he got Alberti to dress up what was a sort of a Gothic church with all this Renaissance marble clothing. But it only got so far, as you can see, and then everything went horribly wrong for Malatesta. He was excommunicated by the Pope, who said, it was in the report, they said something about this being a completely pagan temple that he was building that was fit for nothing but orgies or something. I can't remember what they said. But anyway, here's Malatesta in his portrait by, is that Piero della Francesca, I think, and it's in the Louvre. And he looks so sort of harmless, doesn't he? But clearly wasn't. And this is Isotta Deliatti. I like her hairdo, don't you? and that's a medal, and he's rather a one for having medals struck of everybody. But this is Alberti's project. This is what he was trying to build, and so you can see, which is rather fascinating. And I found these apparently, but this was a model put together by the Alberti project, erudite architectural historians working on the definitive Alberti everything. And this model was made for an exhibition at Palazzo Te. You can imagine how wonderful that must have been. But so you can see that on the top, the facade, how it might have been finished, and then the bottom, this enormous dome, which never went on. And so the thing now is just sort of unfinished. So there's the facade reaching to the sky but not getting there. And then here over the door, these wonderful panels of porphyry. And then on the sides, you see you've got this sort of arcading going on, and then it just sort of comes to a stop. And then here through the arcades, you can see the old Gothic windows, which are still there. And here on the outside, you can see Isotta and Sigismondo, IS. Presumably the church didn't look that kindly to him putting his initials and his mistress's initials all over the outside of this vast church. But anyway, the point is the inside. Just absolutely mind-boggling because it's on an enormous scale. And there are just these sort of mountainous walls of carved marble. You're not really sure what was under this canopy. So there's an enormous angel holding up this canopy. And then presumably there was some tremendous tomb was going to be there, and it didn't get finished in time. And then on the right, you see the pier is supported by two black basalt or something elephants. And I think the elephants were family heraldic supporters or something, and they recur everywhere. But aren't these elephants divine? There are all these railings, so there are all these side chapels, and then the main body of the church is just an enormous barn-like space. Catholic Church had run the place since Malatesta's downfall. I mean, have tried, sort of slightly tried to kind of, push it to one side and slightly pretend it's not all going on, as they don't really, they kind of leave these side chapels sort of slightly just sitting there. And it sort of feels like they're a bit embarrassed by them, which, I mean, they would be, wouldn't they? Because he was excommunicated. And then these enormous piers, look at them. And there's stacked up carvings of babies doing stuff, obviously, because babies, the baby obsession continues. And there on the wall, whose tomb is that? Is that Malatesta's? But you can see there's just an explosion of elephants. There are elephants holding up the casket. And then there are elephants as a crest on top of the helmet. Just elephants, 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 and babies. But that enormous carved white marble pier thing is sitting on, do you see that sort of blackish thing that looks like a wreath? That's bronze. That's huge cast bronze, vines and grapes. The lavishness of the whole project is extraordinary. Here on the left, I suppose that's Cancer, And then here, I think this is the chapel of St. Sigismund, who of course was the patron of his namesake, Malatesta. And you can see the old Gothic windows, and then here babies doing stuff with a blue background. But they are just wonderful. Quite a lot of it relating to classical authors, relating to, the ancient world and the Golden Age. And so here are babies using inflated animal skins as boats, I think, aren't they? Do you see that holding the legs of these inflated animal skins? And that was written about by some Latin author, I think. It's a nice bit, really, they're angels, of course, aren't they? But they just look like mad, sort of lumpish babies with very long hair, and they're kind of wringing their hair out in water, and it's very strange. I do think it's very strange, but very beautiful and very fascinating. And here's a railing with, again, elephants. You see there are elephant trunks with tusks holding up these scrolls with some sort of motto on them. The white marble railing, and on the left you see an I and an S for Isotta and Sigismondo. The most magnificent sort of tomb of all. And I have a feeling this one was for all of the ancestors. And I think they collected all the ancestral bones of everybody and sort of dumped them in that big casket there. But isn't it fantastic? Look at that enormous sort of mad canopy drapery thing going around it. And all painted in this rather wonderful, vivid blue. See, and there's Malatesta in profile again. It is quite surprising that this stuff stayed, really. You'd have thought that the Pope would have sent someone round with a chisel to hack it all off. So we're just going to nip up the Autostrada to Bologna and go to the Archiginnasio, which is, a terribly, terribly old and important university. And it has this fantastic sort of cloister courtyard thing with all these amazing monuments, which are all recording, I think they're all recording donations to the university, something like that. I suppose they're sort of 1630, 1650 kind of thing, most of them. But they are really, really fantastic. A fresco painting down below. All in very Bolognese colours, and Bolognese colours are all very muddy. There's a lot of sort of umber and sienna, and rather wonderful colours. The whole city's like that. I love it. And it is this entire courtyard just filled with them. Great, great fun. And look at this, and it's got some rather nice scagliola going on there. Right, black and white, marble-looking stuff. And it's also, it was anyway when I used to go, it was absolutely filthy, which made it even better, It's all covered in a thick layer of dust. But then you go upstairs, and there is the Anatomical Theatre, which is a fantastic thing that's built in 1630 or something. And I think these famous two figures that are holding up the sort of baldachin over the speaker's rostrum, you see, and so the speaker would get up there and he'd sort of stand and read stuff from there, while his assistants demonstrated how to cut up a body properly down below. And so he's flanked by these two figures, which are called gli spelati, like the flayed ones or the skinned ones. And so these are very anatomically correct figures done by a man called Ercole Lelli, who was, I think he was a wax artist. But the ceiling and the whole place was, I think, bombed in the war. And they went through the rubble and they picked out all of the bits of carving and everything. And then they rebuilt it. But they kept it as they did, like with the theatre in Parma, where they rebuilt it just in plain wood. And they didn't paint it. Here again, they didn't paint it. And I assume that the whole thing was painted originally. But it looks rather great like this. And there's the mad ceiling with another anatomical figure hanging from the centre of it. But here's the baldachin, the sort of speaker's rostrum, with gli spelati. And you can see how incredibly beautifully they're carved. And you can see the spine showing and all of the musculature and everything. And they're absolutely life-size, they're fantastic. Here are the feet with all the tendons and what have you. And then looking down from the feet, and you see that's the anatomist's table, which is a white marble slab originally. I'm not sure if it's still white marble. And then the assistants would be in there doing the cutting up. And I suppose students might crowd in. And so they were kept back by that balustrade. Or maybe they were very polite and they just sat around in the seats. So there's the anatomist's table. And looking up at the baldachin. I seem to have got very carried away, don't I, with these spelati figures. But then who wouldn't? But imagine being the anatomist lecturer, standing up there trying to lecture while this guy is looking down at you. Must have been quite something, mustn't it? Especially when it was painted in probably in lifelike colours. It is extremely beautiful.